The ocean covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface, yet it remains the most unexplored and inaccessible space on the planet. Just think about it. We know more about the surface of the Moon than the depths of the Mariana Trench. It is there, beyond the reach of light and human understanding, that things happen that defy the usual laws of physics. Signals of unknown origin, sunken cities, ghost ships, underwater structures not marked on any map. Every time we think we're getting closer to a solution, the ocean reveals a new secret, and everything becomes more confusing. This collection is made up of 35 of the most mysterious, disturbing, and documented phenomena associated with the seas and the deep. Some have been studied for decades, others have been erased from reports and maps. But they all leave one question. What lies down there, beneath the miles of water, where technology doesn't work, and where even sound loses its shape? It's time to dive head-on into the ocean's mysteries that scientists have been desperately trying to unravel for centuries. The ghost ship Orang Medan. In late 1947, between Sumatra and the Strait of Malacca, ships passing through this densely populated stretch of ocean began receiving short, intermittent distress signals. The radio messages were jumbled and garbled, but their meaning was clear: a desperate call for help from the Dutch ship Orang Medan. According to the operators, the messages sounded frightening. The person sending them claimed that the entire crew was dead. The last recorded phrase was, "I'm dying." The first to respond was an American merchant ship nearby. They immediately changed course and arrived at the coordinates indicated in the signal. The Orang Medan was drifting in calm waters with no signs of movement. When the crew boarded, they were met with a scene that was more reminiscent of a horror movie than reality. All of the crew were dead. Their bodies lay on the deck, in the engine room, in the radio room. Their faces were distorted in a grimace of horror. Their eyes were wide open. Their arms were stretched out in front of them, as if at the last second they were trying to fight off something that no one could see. What was especially strange was that there was not a single wound on the bodies. No traces of violence, no signs of suffocation, no poisoning. It was as if death had come instantly and to everyone at once. Even the dog on the ship was dead, frozen in an aggressive pose with a grin directed into the void. The air temperature in the engine room was so low that the rescuers produced steam when they breathed, despite the tropical climate outside. Before the Americans could begin towing the ship, they noticed smoke rising from the hold. A few minutes later, the Orang Medan exploded. A huge flash tore the hull apart, and the ship instantly sank underwater. No traces were found. Later investigations reached a dead end. According to some sources, the Orang Medan was never officially registered. According to others, it was involved in transporting toxic substances from World War II. But no explanation could answer the main question: what happened on board? Why did the entire crew die simultaneously, without a single chance to resist? What did they see in the last moment of their lives? Some researchers suggest that the cause was a leak of chemical weapons or poisonous gas. Others point to radiation anomalies recorded in the area later. But among the strangest versions is the hypothesis of contact with an unknown entity, a being or phenomenon that leaves no traces except one: absolute, silent horror frozen on the faces of the dead. Only the transcript of the radiogram remained in the archives. A few phrases, fragmentary, shaking, as if they were typed in panic. The last line, "I die," seemed to have been written not by a human hand, but with a premonition that no one would be able to read it to the end. The bloop signal is the loudest sound that should not exist. In 1997, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, conducted routine monitoring of seismic activity in the South Pacific Ocean. The goal was to track underwater earthquakes and potential threats to coastlines. But on May 19th, the instruments recorded something that would become one of the most frightening and inexplicable mysteries of the deep for decades. It was a sound, very short, about 1 minute, but so loud that it was recorded more than 3,500 kilometers from its origin. It was called simply bloop. At first glance, it could have been underwater seismic activity. However, the signal had a peculiarity. It had a biological structure. Simply put, it resembled the roar of a living creature. But by all accounts, to produce such a sound, the source would have to be enormous, much larger than a blue whale, the largest animal known to man. And yet, no visual evidence or traces were found near the coordinates of the sound. The bloop coordinates, 50 degrees south latitude and 100 degrees west longitude, pointed to a remote area of the South Pacific Ocean, close to the mythical site of the Nazca Plateau and the supposed location of the sunken city of Relics, made famous by the works of Lovecraft. By a strange coincidence, it is in these waters that, according to fantastic descriptions, an ancient creature that cannot be named sleeps. And although this coincidence was written off as fiction, the very fact that the signal came from almost the same coordinates gave rise to a wave of speculation and alternative hypotheses. Scientists tried to find a rational explanation. Versions ranged from ice avalanches in Antarctica to underwater volcanoes. However, none of the hypotheses could reproduce the sound, even close in characteristics. And most importantly, not a single similar signal was repeated with the same power and timbre. It came once and disappeared. For several years, the bloop signal was classified as an unidentified biological source. Only later did NOAA change its wording, calling it a possible ice sound, though with the caveat that the exact nature of the signal remains unknown. This adjustment has drawn criticism from the scientific community. Too many inconsistencies, too many exceptions to the rules. But it's not the sound itself that's most frightening. It's the silence that comes after, the complete lack of repetition, of signs, of activity, as if whatever made bloop no longer exists, or has gone back to sleep. Some researchers suggest that this was a one-time burst of activity from something ancient, something that lives in the heart of the ocean and communicates once every millennium. The signal can still be heard today in NOAA's archives. But if you listen to it at night, in silence, with your eyes closed, the sound is no longer just noise. It becomes a feeling, like someone is calling out of the darkness, like something vast and forgotten still yearns to be heard. Underwater ruins of the Yonoguru structure. In 1986, a Japanese diver and diving instructor named Kihachiro Arata was on a routine dive off the coast of the Japanese island of Yonoguni. He was looking for new routes for tourists when he accidentally stumbled upon something that defied explanation. At a depth of about 25 meters, barely visible through the wavering light of the ocean sun, lay a gigantic rock structure. At first glance, it seemed like a natural formation, but the longer he looked, the more convinced he became that this was something else. Platforms, stairs, perfectly straight walls, 90-degree angles, projections resembling throne seats and terraces as if carved with the precision of an architect. This was not just a rock. This was a city. Later, when scientists, archaeologists, and geologists arrived at the site, disputes immediately flared up. Some claimed that what we saw was a natural formation, the result of earthquakes and erosion. Others, that these are the ruins of a sunken civilization that existed thousands of years ago, perhaps prehistoric. Kihachiro Arata himself remained convinced until the end of his days. He had found the remains of an ancient metropolis that sank underwater as a result of a catastrophe. The Yono-gun structure is enormous. It is roughly estimated to be about 150 meters long, about 70 meters wide, and over 20 meters high. It has many levels: wide stone slabs that resemble streets, ledges that resemble stairs, round openings that resemble wells, and even something called a stadium arch. The most striking thing is the precision and symmetry. Nature does not leave such perfectly even edges, especially at such a depth and with such a scale. Some researchers have suggested that the structure is part of a sunken landmass, possibly an ancient bridge between Japan and Taiwan that existed during the last glacial maximum, when sea levels were much lower. If this is true, then Yonaguni could be 10,000 years old or more, making it older than all known architectural structures, including the Egyptian pyramids and the Sumerian ziggurats. However, mainstream science continues to debate. Geologists, such as professors from the University of the Ryukyus, say the local sandstones are subject to vertical and horizontal cracks that could have led to the formation of the stepped shape. However, they do not explain why it was at this particular point in the ocean, in strictly symmetrical lines and with elements that clearly resemble artificial details, such as columns, bridges, and even carved signs on the walls. Diving in the Yonaguni area is often accompanied by strange events. Divers have reported a strange feeling of pressure that is not related to depth. The equipment has recorded short-term electromagnetic bursts. Some reported underwater sounds like someone tapping on a rock in the distance. Cameras left overnight did not always return images. It was as if the water itself was trying to hide something. Proponents of the ancient civilization hypothesis call this place the Japanese Atlantis. They point to similarities with the megaliths of South America, possible symbols reminiscent of ancient writing, and the fact that similar finds have been made off the coast of Cuba and in the Caribbean, as if the remains of the same forgotten civilization were scattered around the world, buried under thick waters. The most disturbing thing about this story is the silence. The Japanese authorities are in no hurry to officially recognize the Yonaguni ruins as a cultural monument. There is no security, archaeological excavations, or tourist center on the site. The structure lies in the oceanic darkness, like a vast block of memory that humanity prefers not to remember, as if acknowledging its existence would require acknowledging that the history of the world was very different. What is really hidden in the stones of Yonaguni? The art of a long-vanished culture? A geological anomaly that can deceive the eye? Or a reminder that the ocean doesn't just keep secrets, it also decides who gets to reveal them? Just looking at these underwater walls makes you shudder. Not because they're dead, but because they look too much like traces of something alive that went deep. And maybe not all the way. The Bermuda Triangle is a territory where the laws of nature disappear. Between the southern tip of Florida, Bermuda, and the coast of Puerto Rico lies an area that has become a symbol of marine anomaly over the past 100 years. Its area is more than 1 million square kilometers. The name is the Bermuda Triangle. Military squadrons have disappeared here, cargo ships have sunk, entire crews have disappeared without a single distress signal. Despite the seeming romanticization, the list of these disappearances is not fiction, but recorded and documented cases. And the question is increasingly being asked, what is happening in these waters? The most famous incident is that of Squadron 19. In December 1945, 5 American bombers took off from a base in Florida for a training flight. The weather was clear, the equipment was in good condition. But after a few hours, the pilots transmitted strange messages over the radio. "We can't see land. Compasses don't work. Everything looks strange." Communications suddenly broke off, and the planes were never seen again. No debris, no bodies, no fuel on the surface. Later, another plane was sent to search, and it too disappeared. In one day, 6 planes and 27 people without a trace. In 1963, the passenger ship Marina II, carrying more than 100 people, disappeared. The ship did not transmit distress signals. No storms or external threats were recorded. The sea was calm that day. Its route passed through the Bermuda Triangle. It has not been found since. Over the decades, dozens of theories have emerged. Electromagnetic fields that disrupt the operation of devices. Underwater volcanoes that spew out giant bubbles of methane that could sink a ship in an instant. Temporal anomalies, portals to other dimensions, remnants of ancient technologies left behind by the sunken Atlantis. Some even pointed to possible intervention by extraterrestrial intelligence. After all, no obvious reasons for the disappearances have ever been discovered. Oceanographers tried to find logical explanations, but each time they encountered details that did not fit into scientific theories. For example, in some cases the last radio signal came from a vessel located in one place, and a few seconds later its echo was caught in another place, hundreds of kilometers further. This happened with submarines and airplanes, as if the space inside the triangle behaved differently, compressed or broken. Divers diving at certain points in the triangle often become disoriented. They report disorientation, strange vibrations in the water, pressure in the head, although the depth is still far from critical. Equipment malfunctions, compasses rotate, echo sounders lose depth, and video cameras record short interference as if an impulse is passing through them. Another oddity is the state of the ocean floor. Deep depressions, like sinkholes, have been discovered in the Bermuda area. They are too symmetrical to be ordinary cracks. In the 1990s, a group of Japanese scientists conducted a series of underwater scans and recorded in these depressions something resembling the outlines of rectangular structures buried under thousands of tons of sand and limestone. Some researchers associate the Bermuda Triangle with myths about sunken civilizations. According to one hypothesis, the center of Atlantis could have been located here. Supporters of this theory point to the coincidence of coordinates with ancient maps as well as to the stories of the tribes of the Caribbean region about the terrible water that swallows all living things. But perhaps the most important thing is the numbers. More than 1,000 documented disappearances without a trace. People, ships, planes, even rescue teams. No other area of the world's oceans shows such a density of incidents under normal conditions. The question is not whether strange things happen here. The question is why no one can explain them. Underwater city. Off the coast of Cuba. Ruins that are not on the maps. In the early 2000s, the Canadian research company Advanced Digital Communications, ADC, which was developing the seabed in Cuban territorial waters, was conducting routine mapping using deep sonar. There was no sign of a sensation. However, at a depth of more than 600 meters, the devices recorded something strange. On the echo sounder screen, outlines appeared that did not fit into natural morphology at all. Platforms, intersecting lines, symmetrical geometric structures resembling streets and buildings. They looked like the ruins of a sunken city. An underwater autonomous camera was subsequently sent to the site. The images it produced were shocking. The video clearly showed stone formations made of blocks that resembled pyramids, stair platforms, and dome structures. Some of them were at an angle, as if the whole thing had been submerged during a sudden shift in the Earth's crust. One of the structures was particularly striking. It resembled a step pyramid, almost identical to those found in Central America. The age of these objects, according to preliminary estimates, could reach 10 to 15,000 years, which would automatically make them older than all known civilizations on the planet. At the time, the official history was that during the last ice age, people in the region were hunter-gatherers, incapable of large-scale construction. If these are indeed ruins, they completely change the chronology of human civilization. Cuban authorities confirmed the discovery, but soon restricted access to the area. No further dives were conducted. Some speculate that the research was halted due to political pressure. Others believe that the discovery was so shocking that it was simply forgotten so as not to challenge basic scientific dogma. Alternative history proponents have also drawn attention to the location. The area of the find is located practically on the line connecting Central America with the western part of the Atlantic. Exactly where, according to ancient myths, Atlantis could have been located. Plato described an island that sank underwater in one day and one night, and these collapsed stone structures buried at the bottom of the ocean match his descriptions all too precisely. In the video, which has become publicly available, you can discern stones that look like they were laid out by hand and complex intersecting patterns. Some are sure that these are ancient symbols, perhaps writing. However, the main problem is the depth. No civilization, according to official data, could exist at sea level, which later sank 600 meters below. To explain such depth, one must admit that the ocean level rose sharply at some point, or that the continental plate fell into the abyss as a result of a catastrophe. This is the key detail. There is evidence of tectonic activity in this area of the ocean. There are theories that part of the Caribbean shelf may have been submerged by a massive rift. But then another question arises. What kind of civilization existed on this platform before the catastrophe? Who built these pyramids? Why are they so similar to Mayan and Aztec structures, but are located hundreds of kilometers away and much deeper? To date, no international project has continued to explore these ruins. The site where they were discovered is considered inaccessible. The data is fragmentary. Most scientific institutions ignore the case, calling it unproven or exaggerated. But the video exists, the pictures exist, and the big question still hangs in the air. If it's just an illusion, why are people so afraid to admit it? The Piri Reis map is a depiction of Antarctica that could not exist. In 1929, during the restoration of the ancient Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, a group of historians discovered a fragment of a nautical chart on an abandoned leather parchment scroll. On it was written a name, Piri Reis, a 16th century Turkish admiral and cartographer. It would seem that the artifact was just another example of maritime cartography from the Age of Discovery. But upon closer examination, this map began to destroy scientific dogmas. It depicted the coasts of South America and West Africa with a precision astonishingly superior to that time. But the most inexplicable thing is that at the bottom of the map, under South America, a continent with mountain ranges, glaciers, and coastline outlines is clearly marked. This land was identified as Antarctica. However, in 1513, when the map was drawn, Antarctica had not yet been discovered. Its official discovery occurred more than 300 years later. This in itself raises alarming questions. But a much more inexplicable detail is the way it is depicted. The map shows the continent without ice cover, with a land relief that is not visible to any modern observer. Only in the mid-20th century, thanks to seismic sounding, were scientists able to reconstruct the shape of the continent under kilometer-thick layers of ice, and it coincided with the image on the Piri Reis map. According to the annotations, Piri Reis did not create the map from scratch, but used dozens of ancient sources, including ancient sea charts from the time of Alexander the Great. Some researchers suggest that the admiral had copies of much more ancient maps at his disposal, created by an unknown civilization that had either aerial vision or cartographic accuracy unattainable even in the 19th century. The U.S. military once studied the map as part of a project to analyze impossible artifacts. Documents declassified in the 1960s confirm that the Pentagon was interested in the map because of its similarities with geological data obtained during drilling in Antarctica. Moreover, some reports mentioned anomalously accurate imaging of the underwater shelf and internal mountain systems, which were only officially discovered in the 20th century. Skeptics argue that the map's outline is a coincidence or an error. But if it is an error, why does it match all the key features of the ice-free Antarctica? An error that knows where the mountain ranges are beneath miles of ice that are invisible to the eye or telescope. Some theorists have suggested that before the last ice age, Antarctica was indeed ice-free and inhabited, perhaps even the center of an ancient civilization. In that case, the Piri Reis map is more than just an artifact. It is an echo of lost knowledge, a fragment of a world erased by catastrophe and time. It is for this reason that the map is not just curious, but alarming. It shows that someone sometime saw the Earth differently than we do. From above, with precision, with understanding. And if this information once existed, the question is not how Piri Reis got it. The question is, where did those who created it disappear to? The ghost submarines of the Baltic, a fleet that is not in the archives. In the cold waters of the Baltic Sea off the Swedish coast, signals resembling submarine movements have been repeatedly detected in recent decades. They appear on radar screens, produce acoustic fingerprints, and even bounce off deep-sounding echo sounders. But when military or research vessels approach, they disappear without a trace, as if dissolving into the very structure of the water. The Swedish and Finnish military regularly raise the alarm, considering this a violation of territorial borders. But no country confirmed the presence of submarines. Moreover, some of the objects, according to their characteristics, did not correspond to any known model of underwater technology. In 2011, a group of commercial explorers searching for sunken World War II ships used lateral sonar to detect unusual structures on the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The objects were shaped like streamlined cylinders, were all the same size, and stood almost parallel to each other, as if they were resting on an invisible dock. The surface of one of them, according to reports, was made of metal, the structure of which was not identified. When attempting to lower the camera, the connection was lost and was restored only when moving away from the object. These findings gave rise to a wave of hypotheses. Some claimed that these were sunken German submarines, about which no records had survived. Others put forward a more alarming theory: experimental underwater vehicles, secretly built during the Cold War and supposedly lost. But the strangeness continued. When they were repeatedly examined, the equipment failed again. Magnetometers went off the scale. Drone batteries died in minutes. Some of these submarines resembled German U-boats in silhouette, but upon closer analysis of the images, it turned out that they had no hatches, no torpedo bays, and no markings, as if they were not built for a crew, or by people at all. Of particular interest was the fact that almost all of the recorded signals coincided in time with geomagnetic bursts. On those days when fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field were recorded, the underwater ghosts appeared more often. Sometimes they moved at an unnatural speed, covering tens of kilometers in minutes, something impossible for any known submarine. Fishermen also began reporting mysterious underwater objects. They told of a wall of dead silence that would suddenly roll over the sea. The noise of engines, waves, even the cry of seagulls would disappear. Then, as if from nowhere, air bubbles would rise, and something would rise from the water that resembled a submarine tower, but without identification marks. A moment later, everything would disappear. There are no official documents of these submarines now. The military does not acknowledge their existence. Not a single one of them has been raised to the surface. No numbers, no archives, no origin, only dull scans and testimonies that no one is in a hurry to comment on. And yet they are there, in the deep, lying on the bottom, silent, covered in seaweed and time. Some are certain, a silent fleet left over from another era or another technology. A fleet that should not exist, but keeps appearing where sound disappears and where the ocean, as always, knows more than it says. The Julia signal is a call from the depths that no one has been able to explain. On the night of March 1st, 1999, coastal monitoring stations of the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, recorded a strange, prolonged sound. It lasted just over 50 seconds and had an unusual shape, resembling a groan or grinding sound. It was not the cracking of ice, there were no signs of an earthquake or underwater collapse. The sound traveled with astonishing speed, covering thousands of kilometers of water. In the NOAA archives, it was given the name Julia. The signal was simultaneously recorded by 7 autonomous hydrophone stations installed on the bottom of the southern Pacific Ocean. The coordinates of the source are the area to the east of the Antarctic Peninsula, near a zone known for its icy silence. However, the main mystery is not even in the strength of the signal, but in its structure. Analysis showed that Julia does not correspond to any known type of geophysical noise. Its sound trace resembled a biological profile, as if it came from a living organism. Only one thing did not add up. To create such a sound, the creature had to be the size of an island. Immediately after the signal was published, a wave of speculation began. A cult grew up around Julia. Alternative history researchers claimed that this was the first case of sound contact with an unknown oceanic life form. Considering that the depths in the area of registration reach several kilometers, a hypothesis arose about the existence in the abyss of an ancient creature capable of producing such sounds, but inaccessible to cameras or radars. Some even compared the profile of Julia to descriptions of monsters from Polynesian myths, huge sleeping creatures talking to water. NOAA initially suggested that the sound was caused by a massive iceberg collapse or ice mass sliding across the continental shelf. However, this theory did not stand up to scrutiny. Even the most powerful ice collapses did not produce similar frequency and time characteristics. In addition, no satellite recorded an ice event during the specified period. In 2014, an independent team of researchers reanalyzed the spectral sound using updated algorithms. The results were alarming. Julia's voice contained modulations characteristic of living sounds. That is, the signal was not uniform or mechanical. It had a breathing quality, as if someone was actually producing it with effort, with a rhythm characteristic of organic systems. The Julia signal has never been repeated. In 20 years of observation, no hydroacoustic station has recorded anything even remotely similar. It is a single event, like an exclamation in the void, like a call or a warning. Interestingly, a few days after the signal was registered, an abnormal drop in water temperature and a short-term deviation of the magnetic field were recorded in the same area. Whether these phenomena are related, no one knows. But the chronology matches. Some researchers call Julia an acoustic phantom, a reminder that the ocean can speak to us, and does so in its own language, a language we don't understand, or maybe we don't want to understand. The files containing the signal are still available in NOAA's public archives. Anyone can listen to the low, almost viscerally frightening noise. But everyone who has done so says the same thing. You don't want to hear it twice. Because there is something in this sound that evokes an instinctive response in a person. Fear of something ancient, huge, and already awakened. A sunken platform with an unknown device is an object that is not listed in any registry. In 2013, off the southwest Pacific coast, in the area between New Zealand and the Kermadec Islands, a group of private researchers specializing in deep-sea exploration accidentally recorded an anomalous relief on the seabed. Initially, it looked like the wreckage of a drilling platform or a sea laboratory. But upon closer examination, it became clear that no data on such structures in this area ever existed. No state or private corporation reported losses. Moreover, no platform in history had ever been installed in this area. The object was located at a depth of about 750 meters. Its shape resembled a hexagonal platform with a central protruding part surrounded by something similar to pedal structures or antennas. The material is unknown. Analysis of the magnetometer showed an abnormally low magnetic resistance, as if the device was absorbing signals. Hydrophones installed on the devices recorded an unnatural attenuation of sound. Near the object, the acoustic wave behaved as if there was something soft inside the water, absorbing the resonance. The platform appeared to be intact, although it was clearly old. Its surface showed no signs of corrosion typical of metal structures at such depths, but symmetrical grooves resembling cooling channels were visible throughout the surface. The center of the device was raised like a dome, and when illuminated by the camera, an internal glow was reflected, as if there was a translucent crystal inside. A day after the discovery, the research vessel lost contact with the remote drone sent to take close-up photos. The connection was lost immediately. Attempts to find the craft were unsuccessful. The cable seemed to have melted, not torn. Strange wave rings were observed on the water within a radius of 10 kilometers, which could not have been caused by wind or current. 2 days later, the ship left the area without leaving a geotag or transferring the materials to open sources. Information about the discovery was leaked only thanks to a leak by one of the project's engineers. The photos were removed from the forums within hours, and the accounts were blocked. The same engineer later claimed that the object resembled something technical, but not of human origin. It looked like an antenna, only not for communication, but for perception, as if something was listening. Proponents of extraterrestrial technology hypotheses immediately linked this discovery with other ocean mysteries, including Bloop and Julia. The area where the platform was discovered is inaccessible, rarely visited, and remote from major shipping routes. Satellite data transmission failures have been repeatedly recorded, as well as strange electromagnetic pulses that could not be explained by solar activity. Several transoceanic cables linking Asia and America were inexplicably disconnected in the same area. The damage was described as sudden and local. No ship capable of damaging the cables was in the area of the incident. Today, the platform officially does not exist. It is not listed in the Register of Marine Structures or in the databases of lost underwater equipment. No government talks about it. But those who have seen it say it does not resemble any human machine. And if this device is not for transmitting a signal, then perhaps it is for receiving one. And the main question remains open. What exactly is it waiting for? And what might it one day hear? The mysterious dome in the Bermuda Triangle is a structure that cannot be scanned. In the mid-1990s, an American oceanographic group working in the Bermuda Triangle was conducting another series of deep-sea scanning of the bottom for karst formations and possible flooding sites. One of the echo sounders passing in an area approximately 200 kilometers from the coast of Florida recorded an anomalous elevation with perfectly regular geometry. In contrast to the chaotic shapes of the surrounding reefs and sedimentary rocks, the object had a perfect hemispherical shape, an almost mathematically precise radius, and, strangest of all, a complete lack of texture. When the probe was lowered closer, the image on the screen resembled a smooth dome covered with something similar to glass or polished stone. The surface did not reflect light, but extinguished it without giving any backlight. As if the material was created not for visualization, but for concealment. When trying to scan the object again, the equipment failed. The image disappeared, the signal went out, the equipment froze. The team lowered the autonomous device with the camera, but it turned off after reaching a height of 20 meters above the structure. The batteries overheated for no apparent reason. At the same time, the water on the surface began to vibrate, although the sea remained windless. There were no ships nearby. A few minutes later, the camera returned to working order, but all data from the moment of the failure was completely erased. Several years later, a similar structure was recorded by another expedition, this time from a different direction. Again, a perfect dome. Again, technical failures. But this time, the crew managed to record a short fragment of video. A massive hemispherical formation covered with something resembling hexagonal patterns, like an insect's shell. This video has not been released to the public. According to unconfirmed leaks, it was seized by representatives of a U.S. naval military organization, and all information on this object is classified. There are many versions of how this structure appeared. Some believe that it is part of an ancient dome complex, perhaps the remains of some kind of energy station of a sunken civilization. Others, that it is a geological formation formed by an unusual movement of magma. However, no one can explain why the equipment stops working near the object, and why the dome itself does not show any trace of destruction or erosion, despite the pressure and time. The most daring theories claim that the dome is a shelter, a protective barrier over something inside. Some point to coordinates that match strange magnetic anomalies, missing ships, and even brief bursts of radio noise with an irregular frequency that resembles a coded pulse. There is another hypothesis. The dome is not a structure. It is a living structure, possibly a form of biological intelligence capable of camouflage and self-defense. This is confirmed by unusual deviations in the temperature of the water near the object, periodic acoustic bursts, and rare visual observations of strange shadows in the depths, appearing and disappearing without a trace. Whatever it is, it doesn't go away. It remains on the bottom, impenetrable, mute, indifferent to human presence. Sometimes, during rare hours of complete silence, fishermen in the area report a dull pressure on their ears and a brief sound, like a deep rumble. And those who hear it never return to that area. No one knows how long this dome has been lying on the bottom. No one can say what lies beneath it. But one detail is especially frightening. It is not covered in sediment like other objects at such a depth. This means only one thing. It is active. It is working. It is waiting. Deep sea trail in the Mariana Trench. Tracks leading to nowhere. The Mariana Trench is the deepest point in the oceans, known as the Challenger Deep, reaching almost 11 kilometers. This is a place of diving, technical records, and absolute darkness. There is no light here, almost no equipment on Earth can withstand the pressure, and the temperature remains close to zero. It would seem that there could be nothing here except silent water and a thick layer of sediment. But in 2016, an autonomous vehicle lowered into one of the branches of the depression as part of an international project to study the geomorphology of the bottom recorded something that baffled even the most experienced oceanographers. At a depth of more than 10 kilometers, the camera showed a series of uniform depressions in the muddy bottom. They were arranged with striking symmetry at equal distances from each other, forming a clear, linear trajectory that extended beyond the camera's field of view. These depressions resembled footprints, as if someone or something very large, heavy, and moving in a straight line had walked along the bottom. The research team stopped the device and tried to move the camera closer to the tracks. They had a clear shape, approximately the same depth, and what was especially strange was that they were not disturbed by currents or sediments, which is impossible at such a level of pressure and water activity. As if they had been left recently, the robot followed the trail. It continued for more than 30 meters until the device reached its technical limit. The last frame showed that the tracks suddenly disappear, ending in emptiness, where the bottom abruptly drops into an even deeper crack, as if something had descended there or soared upward. Scientists who studied the materials put forward several hypotheses. The most obvious is a tectonic fault leading to a collapse of the bottom layer, but such failures cannot create a regular, rhythmic form. The second version is the impact of an underwater robot. But the apparatus's mass is insufficient, and the depressions were tens of meters further from the drone's route, which excludes its involvement. Some people noticed oddities in the structure of the sediment around the tracks. It was compacted as if it had been subjected to strong pressure. Analysis showed the presence of rare minerals that are usually formed when interacting with living organisms of the extremophile class. However, organisms capable of leaving such traces do not exist in official biology. Later, several experts admitted in private conversations, this could be a mechanical trace, that is, from some underwater device. However, who owns the equipment capable of moving along the bottom of the Mariana Trench at a level where even military submarines lose control? There is no answer. The findings were never officially released. The reports were classified by the partner institute that took part in the mission. However, leaks remained, and copies of the video footage are still circulating among the scientific community under the heading Unconfirmed. Those who saw them are sure there is something in the depths, something that moves, something that leaves a trace behind but does not return the same way. The Mariana Trench has always been considered silent. But perhaps it is not silent. Perhaps it simply does not want to be heard, or not by us. The shadows that fall underwater off the coast of Chile are a phenomenon that has no cause or analogy. Along the southern coast of Chile, in the Chiloé archipelago region, where the Pacific Ocean meets cold currents and frequent storms, fishermen have for decades reported strange phenomena that mainstream science has ignored. One of the most frightening is the shadows falling from the sky onto the seabed, although the sun is covered by thick clouds at these moments and light is unable to penetrate to such depths. These shadows are not accompanied by flashes, splashes, or sounds. They simply appear, then move, and disappear. The first documented observation occurred in 2007, when an autonomous probe installed at a depth of about 300 meters recorded a sudden eclipse of the field of view on video. The image darkened abruptly, but not because of a mechanical failure or contamination of the lens. The light went out gradually, as if something massive was floating between the surface and the camera, completely blocking access to natural light. According to calculations, the object should have been over 80 meters long and moving at an unusually slow speed, as if it was not trying to hide, but on the contrary, absorbing the gaze. However, neither acoustics nor sonar recorded anything. When the team tried to repeat the dive a few days later, the instruments began to malfunction. The screens made noise, the compasses rotated, and the camera, having reached the same level, turned off by itself, as if someone had cut an invisible thread. Locals, especially Mapuche descendants, have called this phenomenon the Weeping Sea for centuries. They believed that the one who cannot be seen lived under the water, and when it moved, everything stopped, including light and sound. Some even claim that birds flying over the area died during these shadows. Although there is no evidence to support this, repeated panic among seagulls has indeed been recorded by satellites. Satellite images in the infrared spectrum also gave alarming results. On the days when the cameras recorded the shadow, the water surface temperature dropped by 3 to 4 degrees for several minutes and then returned to normal. This is impossible under normal climatic conditions. The only explanation is a mass capable of screening solar radiation without leaving a visible trace. In 2018, a private company monitoring ocean currents attempted to conduct high-resolution imaging in the area. But during the expedition, the drone signal went missing for 6 minutes. When it returned, half the files were corrupted. The rest of the video is a fragment showing the camera underwater slowly sinking into darkness, although according to calculations, the drone remained at the same depth and in the same position. Then something round appears, like an eye looking from the depths. And the recording ends. The video was leaked online, but within 24 hours, all copies were deleted without explanation. The expedition members never contacted the press again. Today, this phenomenon has not been explained. Some believe it is the result of the interaction of geomagnetic fields. Others believe it is a sign of a huge biological life form hiding in the least studied areas of the Pacific Ocean. The most frightening thing is the feeling that the shadow is looking back, that the ocean is not only storing, but also observing. And perhaps at some point it will stop simply observing. The sunken ring off the coast of Iceland is a structure that disrupts geological timeline. In the waters of the North Atlantic off the southern coast of Iceland, an oceanographic expedition in 2002 studying seismic activity along the mid-Atlantic ridge came across something strange. At a depth of about 500 meters, the sonar recorded a perfectly round structure resembling a giant ring or arena, the diameter of which exceeded 100 meters. But it was not just a ring of stone. It had a layered, multi-level architecture, as if built from concentric segments. At first, geologists thought they were looking at the remains of a volcanic crater. But repeated scans revealed that the ring not only was not of volcanic origin, but was also made of non-native rocks that were not found in the surrounding area. Most of the structure is made of basalt, but it has an anomalous magnetic profile that does not match any known Icelandic rock. The central part of the ring was especially alarming. It was raised like a pedestal, and on its top there was a symmetrical protrusion, reminiscent of an obelisk or a beacon. This detail was too geometrically correct to be accidental. Experts compared the object to the megaliths of Stonehenge, but the difference was in the scale and feeling. Everyone who has observed the ring through deep-sea drone cameras has described a strange sense of intentionality, as if the structure had been built with a purpose, the meaning of which has been lost or hidden. Later, when the expedition tried to conduct a spectral analysis of the rocks, they encountered another problem. The age of the basalt turned out to be younger than the sedimentary layer on which it rested. This is impossible. The sediment layer should have accumulated after the formation of the rock, and not the other way around. This violates all geological logic. The only explanation is external intervention, as if the ring was installed on the bottom much later than the bed was formed. Magnetic anomalies were also recorded. Compasses lost orientation above the ring, gyroscopes went crazy, and drones began to tremble as if they were moving along a dense electromagnetic grid. When attempting to lower an underwater acoustic cannon into the ring zone, the signal from it did not return. The waves seemed to fall into silence. One of the most disturbing details emerged years later. Comparisons of the ring's image with ancient maps from Icelandic sagas revealed a coincidence. Some myths mention a stone that calls forth a voice within located in the middle of darkness. These texts were considered allegories until the ring turned up on the same coordinates where ancient fishermen refused to fish, saying that the water beneath them whispers. Today, the site is not being explored. There are no official works on it. Satellite images of the area are fogged up. Geophysical data is no longer available. The area has been declared unstable due to volcanic activity, although no eruption has been recorded here in the last 20 years. Some believe the ring is an artifact of an earlier civilization that existed long before ours. Others believe it is a structure connected to something that still operates underwater, perhaps at a deep level that modern science has not detected. But everyone who has studied the ring agrees on one thing. It shouldn't be where it is, and it doesn't look like anything on Earth. It's like a mirror we don't dare look into yet. The still light in the Arabian Sea is a phenomenon that does not move with the waves. For decades, sailors, fishermen, and pilots flying over the northern Arabian Sea have regularly reported a strange phenomenon. A huge glow in the water that, contrary to the laws of nature, does not change shape, does not waver, and does not go out, even during strong storms. It can be up to several dozen kilometers wide, resembling a glowing circle or a flat surface with a soft blue-green glow, as if the ocean were illuminated from within. One of the most recorded cases is considered to be the observation from the board of the American military satellite in July 2005. At night, a perfectly round area of water was recorded, brightly glowing in the infrared spectrum, while the temperature of the water did not differ from the surrounding one. The land ships sent to the area confirmed that the glow was visible not only from space, but also directly from the surface. However, the instruments did not record any bioluminescent organisms. There were no changes in the chemical composition of the water, no radiation, no movement. Pilots flying over the area reported unusual pressure on their temples and brief failures of navigation instruments, especially when the plane crossed the edge of the glowing circle. One captain of a civilian airliner admitted that when they flew directly over this spot, the navigator lost his bearings, and a reflection appeared on the radar screen as if there was a huge metal dome under the plane. The most disturbing sighting occurred in 2012 when a group of Iranian fishermen approached the glow zone and noticed that the sound of their engines became muffled, as if muted, and the water around the boat began to vibrate slowly. Within minutes, everything returned to normal, but one of the crew later reported a fog in their minds and a strong feeling of being observed. Oceanographers have attempted to give a scientific explanation for the phenomenon. The first hypothesis is a mass accumulation of bioluminescent bacteria, but it is impossible to keep them in such a stable geometry, especially when the sea is rough. The second is the reflection of light from satellites and the moon, but then the glow would move with the waves, while here it remained motionless, as if applied to glass. Later, a group of Indian scientists put forward a theory about a possible deep anomaly. According to their data, there is an area of increased rock density under the seafloor in this area, possibly associated with an ancient meteorite impact or a local void in the lithosphere. Theoretically, this could cause unusual optical effects, but no evidence was found. It is also interesting that in ancient maps of Persian and Arab sailors, this area was marked as the Mirror of the Gods, and sailors tried to avoid it. They believed that the sea does not speak here, and if a ship lingers too long in this light, it can disappear. Some of them claim that prayers do not work in the glow zone, that the voice goes down and does not return. Today, this anomaly remains unsolved. No major international ocean research project has announced plans to study this phenomenon in detail. Satellites still record it periodically, at intervals of several months, always in the same place. The light appears suddenly, lasts for 3 to 5 hours, and disappears. No attempt to get closer and study it from the inside has been successful. What causes this light? What structure lies beneath it? And most importantly, why is it motionless, as if denying the very nature of the sea? Sinking ships found intact at the bottom of the Java Sea, a ghost fleet that has survived the passage of time. In the waters of the Java Sea, between Indonesia and Malaysia, lies one of the largest mass graves of ships from World War II. Here, in February 1942, a large-scale naval battle took place between the combined fleet of the Allies and the Japanese squadron. Dozens of ships were sunk. Many of them were never found. However, starting in 2013, a group of Dutch researchers surveying the seabed in the area began recording something inexplicable. At a depth of 50 to 70 meters, entire ships were discovered, standing vertically or tilted, but without signs of destruction, holes, or deformation of the hull. The ship's skins looked almost untouched, as if they had sunk to the bottom carefully, as if preserving themselves for something. There was no rust despite decades underwater. The guns were in place. The radar antennas were intact. As if time had passed these steel giants by. However, the strangeness was just beginning. When trying to record the exact coordinates of the ships, the GPS equipment began to distort the data, creating the illusion of movement. When the probe with the camera approached one of the cruisers, the signal and image began to float, as if the reality itself around was changing, losing focus. On the surface of the water, directly above the ships, fishermen have long noted anomalous areas. Dead zones where fish are not caught, engines work intermittently, and the air seems dense, as if oversaturated with moisture. One of the fishermen claimed to have heard a metallic hum in these places, as if coming from below, like the sounds of engines turning on in the void. But the strangest thing happened in 2016. When researchers returned to the site of one of the discovered ships, they found nothing. It had disappeared. No debris, no traces, no change in the relief. In its place was a flat bottom. All the coordinates matched, but the ship was gone. It was as if it had never existed, despite the fact that 2 years earlier it had been photographed and mapped. Later, 2 more disappeared. These cases were recorded in reports, but they were never explained. Not a storm, not a shift in soil, not an illegal lift. Such operations simply could not have taken place in a military-controlled zone. All versions were shattered by the main thing. The ships were too intact to have disappeared without a trace. Some suggest that there is a deep geophysical effect in the area that causes optical illusions or spatial distortions. Other, more radical theories talk about time pockets in which the ships seem to freeze outside the usual flow of history. This would explain their freshness, the absence of traces of currents and corrosion. But there is an even darker version, that the ships, for some reason, did not accept death and continue to exist as phantoms. Not ghosts in the metaphysical sense, but real objects, but outside of time, frozen in their last moment. Today, local fishermen give these areas a wide berth. Some call them zones where the war never ended. Because in these waters, deep beneath the sand and salt, something still breathes. Perhaps memory, perhaps history, or perhaps something that doesn't want to be disturbed. Anomalous symmetry of craters in the South China Sea, traces resembling artificial burning. In 2018, an international team of marine geophysicists surveying the bottom of the South China Sea in the area between Luzon and Vietnam discovered a series of perfectly round craters, evenly spaced in a checkerboard pattern over an area of almost 200 square kilometers. At first, they were mistaken for traces of degassing, typical underwater emissions of methane from deep sediments. But upon further analysis, an unnatural regularity was discovered. The craters had the same diameter, depth, and equal intervals between them, accurate to within a centimeter. This symmetry was at odds with the chaotic nature of such formations. The craters appeared to be perfectly aligned, as if someone had marked them out in advance. Moreover, they were located on a section of the seafloor where, geologically, there should not be gas emissions. There were no faults, moving plates, or geothermal sources. When the researchers lowered the autonomous apparatus for visual inspection, the cameras recorded another oddity. The edges of the craters were melted, as if they had been subjected to thermal action. At the same time, the temperature of the surrounding soil remained normal. Chemical analysis showed the presence of microparticles characteristic of ultra-short thermal action, such as, for example, during laser cutting. One hypothesis was that these structures were traces of ancient volcanic events. However, even the most ancient underwater volcanoes do not form such regular patterns, much less create hundreds of identical craters divided according to the grid principle. Others suggested that these could be imprints of unknown life forms living in the water column and interacting with the bottom. But for this to happen, the tracks would have to have dynamic deviations. And here, everything was mechanically precise, like a template. When they tried to conduct a magnetometric scan, the devices began to distort. In some areas, the signal disappeared, as if an invisible screen was hanging over certain craters, blocking the waves. And when they rose to the surface, the data from some of the carrier blocks turned out to be unreadable, as if they had been partially erased. Later, after comparing satellite data over the past 20 years, scientists found that anomalous heat spots were periodically recorded in this zone short-term and not caused by the atmosphere. These spots coincided in coordinates with the points of the craters. One physicist suggested that we are not dealing with emissions, but with the consequences of an ancient energy impact, like a satellite gun or a focused microwave installation, only of unknown origin. Some researchers compared the map of craters with one of the diagrams of an ancient Chinese Taoist text which mentioned gates open at the bottom of the Dragon Sea, through which spirits leave. The coincidence was frightening. The geometry of the drawing in the manuscript and the layout of the craters matched in proportion and shape. Today, this section of the water remains closed to commercial exploration. The official version is an unstable tectonic zone, but the scientists who worked with the original data no longer give interviews. One of the expedition members, on condition of anonymity, said, "This is not geology. This is a structured effect. And it has a source. What exactly caused these craters, a natural wonder, a man-made experiment, or the imprint of someone's intervention, remains unknown. But everyone who sees their images feels the same. Before us is something alien, left behind by an action we do not understand, and perhaps should not understand. Mysterious snake in the Bering Strait. At the junction of the icy Arctic and the northern Pacific Ocean, between Alaska and Chukotka, lies the Bering Strait, a narrow and harsh stretch of sea where currents, ice, and mirages meet. In this cold and restless place, rumors have been circulating for more than half a century about a mysterious creature that local fishermen and Chukchi hunters call the sea snake. But this is not a legend. Over the past 20 years, more than 10 sightings have been recorded, and not one of them has been explained. All the reports are similar in detail. The creature appears at the boundary of ice and open water, moves at great speed, without creating a splash, leaving only a long writhing wave, as if a giant rope were sliding along the surface. The length is estimated at tens of meters. The body is dark, without scales, more reminiscent of a smooth boulder or a metal cylinder. Sometimes the snake goes completely underwater. Sometimes it surfaces and disappears on the horizon. But the most important thing is that it can never be detected by radar or echo sounders. In 2009, an American research submarine studying whale migration recorded an anomalous acoustic disturbance in the waters of the strait. The sound was similar to the impact of a heavy object on the bottom rocks, but the source was never found. A day later, a report came from one of the icebreakers. The crew saw a shadow sliding under the thickness of the ice, at least 50 meters long, moving with a lively bend, but without a tail. Scientists have tried to come up with versions. The first was a giant eel-like fish, perhaps not yet discovered by science. But no creature of such a size can move so quickly and so silently. The second was an optical illusion caused by the play of light between ice and water. However, satellite images confirmed the presence of real movement of the water mass along the trajectory of the supposed creature. One of the most disturbing observations was made by a Russian crew in 2017. The boat was at the edge of the ice when suddenly the water within a 50-meter radius began to slowly swell, rising and falling in rhythm, as if something long and flexible were floating underneath. At the moment of the greatest oscillation, all the electronics on board, navigators, echo sounders, radio stations, switched off simultaneously. 3 minutes later, everything was restored, but this period of time was simply missing from the system logs. Local elders say that the snake is a guardian of the passage, a creature that walks on the border of worlds and appears only when some balance is disturbed. According to folklore, it lives under the ice and breathes through the water, and its purpose is not to be seen, but to remind that not everything in the sea belongs to man. In recent years, the area has seen anomalies in animal migration. Whales and seals avoid the strait during certain months, as if something in the depths is scaring them away. Satellite images regularly record strange streaks in the water up to a kilometer long with no apparent source of movement. Today, there is not a single reliable image of this snake. All that exists are blurred silhouettes, testimonies, and refusals to comment. Research missions in these latitudes are sharply limited, officially because of weather conditions. Unofficially, because no one wants the snake to appear too close. Because, as those who have seen it with their own eyes say, it doesn't sail away, it watches, and waits for you to turn away. The vortex funnels at the bottom of the Greenland Sea are a phenomenon that violates the physics of currents. In the northeast Atlantic, in the icy deep waters between eastern Greenland and the Svalbard archipelago, scientists have long studied the so-called Greenland Gyre, a zone of powerful downwelling currents where dense, cold water sinks to the bottom, forming part of a global ocean conveyor belt. But in 2021, as part of an international program to track climate change, an expedition discovered an anomaly that does not fit into known circulation patterns. At a depth of more than 3,000 meters, the probe recorded a large-scale funnel, the diameter of which exceeded 100 meters. It would seem that underwater vortices are not uncommon, but this one was different. It rotated in the opposite direction from all known flows in this region and at the same time created negative pressure, drawing in not only water but also microparticles of bottom sediments, despite the density and stability of the layers. It was impossible. Even the most powerful natural vortices are not capable of capturing and lifting bottom sediments at the speed recorded by the instruments. One of the researchers compared it to a reverse black hole, only in an aquatic environment, a zone where matter is not absorbed into the depths but disappears in a flat vortex without disturbing the environment. Attempts to lower an autonomous device into the funnel zone ended in an emergency. Communication was lost at the 2,950-meter mark, and the last frames of the video showed the camera entering a zone of distorted light. The picture worries, the horizon tilts, and then a short white splash appears, reminiscent of a sensor overload. The device was never found. The shape of the funnel also raised questions. Its center was a geometrically perfect circle surrounded by concentric rings, as if the structure was built inward according to a strict algorithm. Such shapes are impossible in a dynamic, chaotic system like the ocean. Moreover, 3 days after the probe disappeared, the area was rescanned. There was no funnel. The water behaved as usual, the bottom remained untouched, the sediment was in place, as if nothing had happened. Later, while studying the archives, one of the oceanographers discovered that similar readings, short-term pressure surges, particle disappearances, compass distortions, had been recorded in the area since the 1960s, but they were considered measurement artifacts. Only now did it become clear. These signals fit together into a general picture, indicating the periodic appearance of a short-term structure operating according to unknown principles. Some scientists suggest that this could be the result of a potential water breakthrough into the subcortical space, that is, a cavity hidden under the bottom. But if so, then the pressure should have caused the eruption, not the suction. Others, that we have encountered a deep geometric structure, possibly created artificially or arising with the participation of an unknown factor. One of the few witnesses, a sailor who served on a submarine in the area in the 1980s, recalled how the vessel suddenly fell into a smooth hole for 3 seconds, losing 70 meters of altitude without mechanical momentum. At the time, it was attributed to a depth gauge malfunction. Today, his account is perceived differently. The Greenland Sea remains a place where nature behaves as if it were programmed. And these vortexes are not a glitch, but a trace of something that appears, acts, and disappears. Without a trace, without a reason, but with a pattern that is too perfect to be random. A dull ringing from the bottom of the Caribbean, a sound that cannot be. The Caribbean is a region with a rich history of underwater eruptions, tectonic shifts, and marine anomalies. But one of the most mysterious and frightening secrets of these waters is a regular low-frequency ringing that comes from the depths between the islands of Jamaica, Cayman, and Cuba. It was first recorded in the late 1990s, and since then it has appeared every 72 hours, at exactly the same time, with minimal deviations, like a program running on schedule. This sound is not like the hum of seismic activity or the vibrations of the Earth's crust. It does not roll through the water column like a normal sound wave. It resonates as if it were coming from a metal cavity. The frequency is about 30 Hz, that is, beyond the range of human hearing, but is captured by all hydrophones installed in the region. The acoustic picture shows a single ringing sound that lasts exactly 4 minutes and has no attenuation, which is absolutely impossible in an aquatic environment. Oceanographers from Columbia University were the first to take an interest in the phenomenon. They installed a network of sensitive sensors on the seafloor and began collecting data. The ringing was repeated with frightening accuracy. Its source was localized at a depth of about 3.5 kilometers, at a point where there is no fault, no volcanic activity, no geological cavities. This zone is considered stable and dead in terms of plate movement. At that time, researchers suggested that the sound could be man-made, allegedly from underwater infrastructure or unauthorized military facilities. But the U.S. and Cuban navies categorically denied any presence of technology in the area. Moreover, underwater satellite radars did not detect any object capable of generating such resonance. All that could be detected was an empty, flat bottom without structures or elevations. However, in 2009, an incident occurred. One of the autonomous vehicles, immersed in the sound zone, stopped transmitting coordinates, although telemetry continued to be recorded. The device disappeared for 10 hours, then surfaced 10 kilometers from the zone, fully functional, but its internal memory was completely empty. Logs, maps, videos, deleted. As if it passed through a magnetic field of such power that it erased everything that was on the digital media. But the radiation sensors showed no extreme readings. Some scientists began looking for parallels in old Cold War-era reports. One mentioned the ringing well effect, a sound recorded by a Soviet subbotnik in 1971 at a point nearly identical to the current source. At the time, it was described as a low pressure on the ears, accompanied by a metallic knocking sound in the depths. The report was classified, and the crew was suspended from service. It was later discovered that during the ringing, subtle pressure fluctuations occur in the water, as if something huge were inhaling and exhaling, but with a motionless mass of water around it. Some researchers have put forward a hypothesis. There may be a cavity under the bottom filled with an unknown material or water of a different composition, which, when interacting with gravitational pressure, produces a pure resonance. But no one can explain why it is so precise. There is an alternative version. The sound is a signal. Perhaps it is not intended for us, but someone must hear it. And once every 3 days it sounds. Unchanging, cold-blooded, precise, not like a scream, but like a call or a command, going into the void, which awaits an answer. The silence of the ocean is not always silence. Sometimes it is expectation. A pillar of fire underwater off the coast of Kamchatka. On the east coast of Kamchatka, at the entrance to Avacha Bay, fishermen have been telling stories for years about a rare but frightening phenomenon. A pillar of fire that flares up underwater and goes straight up, like a flame trapped in the ocean. It appears suddenly, in silence, and without signs of an eruption. Fire underwater is impossible, but dozens of witnesses describe the same thing. A bright orange-red light breaking through from the depths, rising in a smooth column and disappearing as suddenly as it appeared. It was first officially recorded in 2005 from a research vessel conducting hydrothermal surveys. Cameras aimed toward the bottom captured a flash of light that lasted about 30 seconds. It was not accompanied by any release of gas or an increase in water temperature or the appearance of bubbles. Just light, even, directed, stable. Scientists thought of a hydrothermal vent, but there are no active black smokers or volcanic structures in the area. Plus, the light was too bright, like a spotlight. It penetrated more than 400 meters of water and was visible even from the ship on a cloudy night. Moreover, it went strictly vertically, without dissipating, like ordinary light in water. Local fishermen say that the pillar always appears in the same season, in October most often, in the first days of the month. They avoid fishing in those places because after the appearance of light, all marine life disappears from the area for several days. The water becomes dark, like oil. The boat's engines start to choke. And once, according to old-timers, one boat disappeared and was found only a day later, without a crew, 30 kilometers to the south, without any traces of an accident. In 2012, a follow-up expedition with scientific equipment attempted to record the phenomenon. They were lucky. They managed to detect the growth of the energy pulse a minute before the appearance of the light. The data showed a jump in the electromagnetic spectrum, reminiscent of a short pulse with clear modulation, like a transmitting device. Then silence, and then a flash of fiery color, filmed from several angles. But the main thing is that at the moment of the flash, the water did not glow. The light was a separate body, as if projected from the depths. After that, all the ship's electronics failed. The engines shut down, the lights flickered, and satellite communications were interrupted for 22 minutes. When the system was restored, all the instruments showed the same error: out of measurement range. That is, what was happening did not fit into the technical model for describing events. Some experts have put forward a hypothesis about a plasma flash caused by interaction with an unknown underwater structure. But if it is plasma, it should heat the water, cause bubbling, evaporation, thermal waves. Here, nothing. Only light, smooth and almost unreal. Local legends speak of a bottom gatekeeper, a creature that once a year opens its eye and checks to see if anyone has penetrated its depths. And this light is not fire, but a look, opening for a few seconds to see something, or to warn. While official science remains silent, every October researchers peer into the screens of their devices with bated breath. Because if this pole is a signal, then who is it addressed to? And shouldn't we be afraid of what might respond? Invisible currents in the Sargasso Sea, movement of water without cause or direction. The Sargasso Sea is the only sea on the planet that has no shores. It is limited only by currents: the Gulf Stream, the North Atlantic, the Canary, and the North Equatorial. Its waters appear calm, its surface covered with clumps of sargassum seaweed like a vast carpet floating in the windless void. But beneath this apparent silence lies a phenomenon that has defied explanation for decades. Invisible underwater currents that exist in defiance of all known laws of hydrodynamics. They were discovered by chance during a study of microplastics and their migration. Research probes recorded strange jumps in the movement of particles. Objects moved along straight trajectories, bypassing the logical flow. Satellites showed that small water masses moved along curves that did not coincide with either the direction of the wind or the main sea currents. When the autonomous sensors were lowered into the water, they detected movement without pressure. Sections of water seemed to flow into themselves, causing no changes in density, temperature, or salinity. The currents did not push objects. They pulled them inward, enveloping them and leading them away from updrafts and underwater slopes. Later, when probing with LIDAR, it turned out that these moving masses had boundaries, as if they were the walls of transparent pipes wriggling underwater. They did not match the bottom relief and moved independently of the depth, as if they did not obey the laws of gravity or temperature. Sometimes such structures connected, creating closed rings where objects released into the water moved in orbit, like satellites, without external influence. One of the most disturbing episodes occurred in 2010. A small vessel with a scientific team lost contact with a probe lowered to a depth of 200 meters. The device began to move on its own, heading east in a straight line at a speed of about 2 knots. It stopped responding to commands and transmitted only one message: movement in the static layer. 20 minutes later, the signal disappeared. 3 days later, the probe surfaced 100 kilometers from the dive site, but all its sensors were reset, as if the system had recorded the absence of water, temperature, and pressure. Scientists have come to call these zones null pipes, areas where physical parameters do not work. Objects inside are moving, but nothing explains why or where. Spectral analyses have shown no traces of movement. Everything points to the fact that these structures are not a flow in the usual sense, but perhaps transition pockets where water behaves as if it is not water. The folklore of the area speaks of paths in the void, along which the sea itself goes for a walk. Sailors of the last century claimed that in the Sargasso Sea there are places where a ship drifts but does not rock. Today, given modern data, all this seems not superstition, but a cautious description of the inexplicable. And if there really are invisible paths in these waters, the main question arises: who or what moves along them? Because the Sargasso Sea is not just a sea without shores. It is a sea without direction, but with a route that may not be laid out for us. The disappearing noise under Antarctica. In December 2016, several hydroacoustic stations scattered around the planet, from South Africa to the west coast of Australia, recorded an unexplained silence emanating from the depths of the Southern Ocean in the area adjacent to the Antarctic shelf. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the disappearance of the background, as if someone had turned off the very fabric of the acoustic environment. For many years, the region has been known for the so-called Antarctic hum, a persistent background noise created by ice, underwater currents, shelf vibrations, and even echoes from subglacial volcanoes. This hum is one of the most constant acoustic components of the ocean environment. It has never stopped, until one day, the hum stopped at all coordinates where deep-sea listening stations were operating. Perfectly straight lines appeared on the screens, indicating a complete absence of vibrations. At first, they thought it was an equipment failure, but dozens of stations using different systems on different continents showed the same thing. The sound disappeared for exactly 2 minutes and 9 seconds. Then it came back with the same amplitude, frequency, and noise signature as if nothing had happened. But there were nuances. After the silence, the spectrum changed. A subtle emptiness appeared in a certain frequency range, as if a single component of a complex sound pattern that no one had even noticed before had disappeared. As if a note had been removed from a symphony, not the loudest, but the fundamental one. And since then, the entire acoustics of the region sounded different, despite the external similarity. When the researchers began to reconstruct the data, it turned out that at the moment of silence, there had been a surge in the magnetic background, weak but recorded by several geophysical laboratories. At the same moment, satellite cameras tracking the southern ice edge detected a brief pulsating glow beneath the surface in the Ross region. No volcanic eruptions or ice falls were occurring at the time. Later, analyzing archival data, scientists discovered that similar moments of silence had already happened, but previously they lasted for fractions of a second and were not perceived as failures. Every 11 years, to the nearest day, there was a decrease in overall acoustic activity. But it was only in 2016 that the phenomenon first became apparent. Some believe we are witnessing a natural cycle of deep-sea activity, possibly linked to icy structures hidden beneath the continent. Others say it is the result of a large-scale water displacement caused by processes we simply do not understand. But there is a third group of researchers, acousticians, who are certain that the silence is not a glitch, but a signal, perhaps the moment something was connected that should not have been connected. One scientist, who wished to remain anonymous, put it this way: "It felt like everything alive on the bottom held its breath for a moment, not in fear, but in anticipation." The silence lasted 129 seconds. But since then, the entire Southern Ocean has sounded different, and no one can say what exactly we are hearing now, and what, perhaps, we will never hear again. Water that does not sink, deep in the Philippine Sea. In the middle of the Philippine Sea, in the area of the so-called East Mariana Trench, one of the deepest and most unexplored areas of the world ocean, in 2019, an autonomous apparatus studying local chemical variations in water recorded an anomalous cluster of liquid, the behavior of which did not correspond to any known substance on the planet. Inside the normal seawater was a volume similar to a gelatinous bubble that did not dissolve, did not rise or fall. It hung in place as if ignoring the laws of gravity. At first, it was taken for a local salinity lens or a sensor failure, but upon re-immersion, it turned out that the bubble physically existed. Moreover, its surface did not let the probe through, as if an invisible film repelled the instruments. Contact with it caused vibrations in the sensors, and part of the probe's electrical circuits stopped responding, as if they had been immersed in a medium with variable density and nonlinear conductivity. When the probe was returned to the surface, its outer casing, where it had come into contact with the substance, was covered with a thin, almost invisible film that could not be removed. Analysis showed that the film's composition was unknown. Not a single element of the periodic table was detected directly. The material did not react to acid, alkali, temperature, or vacuum. Under the microscope, it looked like a structured lattice, similar to a liquid crystal, capable of changing shape when exposed to light. Repeated surfacings of such bubbles were recorded in the same area, some smaller than a meter, others up to 3 meters in diameter. All behaved the same. They did not move with the current, did not obey pressure, and did not react with the surrounding water. There was a feeling that it was water isolated from water, as if existing in a different state. Not gas, not liquid, not plasma, but something fourth. Some scientists have begun to put forward versions. One of them is an unknown form of fluid life, not recorded by biological methods, possibly based on different chemistry. Another is the residue of an experimental substance used in deep military projects that for some reason got out of control. But no matter how hard they tried, no theory could explain why water that doesn't sink, doesn't dissipate, doesn't disappear, but returns to the same coordinates again and again. In the fishing villages of the Philippines, there is an old legend about a sleeping eye under the water that is not visible but knows. And if you enter its zone, the current will stop, and even thoughts will be silent. It was previously considered an allegory, but now even the elders say, "We warned you that there is no time there." Later, one researcher suggested the incredible. What if these are traces of someone else's consciousness, fixed in the water? After all, if water really does have a memory, as some physicists have long assumed, could it be that in the depths there are frozen thinking fragments, not alive in the biological sense, but existing, like imprints in the fabric of the ocean? If so, then these bubbles are not an anomaly, but a transmission, not a message, but a presence, inert, silent, but existing in our world, on its border. And if they do not dissolve, perhaps they have nothing to dissolve, because they are not made of water, but of what once happened in it, or will happen again. A sonar echo without a source in the black abyss of Tonga is a sound reflected from the void. In the southwest Pacific Ocean, east of the Tonga archipelago, lies one of the deepest points on the planet, the Black Abyss, or as locals call it, the mouth of the ocean. This unofficial name arose after a series of anomalies recorded between 2014 and 2021. Sonar signals reflected from an object that does not exist. When researchers from the International Deep Sea Mapping Program first attempted to map the area's topography in detail, their equipment detected a distinct reflection, massive, vertical, and deep, as if a wall of dense material was receding into the darkness. The echo came quickly and clearly, consistent with a solid surface located at a depth of approximately 8 kilometers. But during repeated dives, when the probe with cameras and laser scanning was directed to this area, it turned out there is nothing. No wall, no ledge, not even a change in the density of the rock. Visually, just emptiness, blackness, and a soft descent into the depths. The equipment sent a signal again, and again received an echo, as if there was still something huge and impenetrable there which the camera does not see, but the sonar hears. The researchers checked for all possible failures. They calibrated the equipment. They changed the pulse frequency. They changed the angle of the signal. Nothing helped. With each attempt, the echo repeated itself, like a mirror returning a glance, but not reflecting a face. It was too clear, too constant, without distortion. This meant only one thing. The surface not only exists, it is stable, and its parameters do not change over time. Later, additional sensors were installed to record acoustic resonances. And then it became clear, in this section of the abyss, there is a dead center from which not only artificial signals, but also natural sounds are periodically reflected. Whale cries, earthquake noises, even distant hydrothermal pulsations. All of them return distorted, as if passing through a structure that does not exist in the physical sense. Some scientists have begun to call this place a sonar shadow, a zone in which reality itself behaves like a material that reflects sound but has no form. One geophysicist likened it to an empty frame, as if there were an empty outline of something that once was, or should have been, at depth. But the most disturbing thing happened in 2019. During another probe, the signal sent into the abyss did not return. 6 seconds passed. Too long. And then another echo came. Like an answer. The frequency was different. The shape of the signal was distorted. It was no longer a reflection. It had been modified as if something in the void had calculated and redirected the response. The instruments had detected a slight phase shift, similar to those that occur in intelligent data processing. The team did not publish this data in an official report. Only 2 years later, in a closed scientific circle, one of the participants admitted, "It was not an echo. It was a response in our own language, only not in words, but in the structure of the sound itself." Since then, no new expeditions have been sent to this region. The abyss remains silent, but its silence has become heavier. Now, everyone who reads the protocols knows. There, in the inky depths, it is not water that is reflected, but memory, or observation. And if you send a signal into the abyss, be prepared for it to hear and respond, but not with what you want. An ice wall off the coast of Greenland that no one can photograph. Off the northeastern coast of Greenland, where cold Arctic waters collide with ancient ice sheets, researchers and naval vessels have repeatedly reported the phenomenon of an emerging ice structure, a vertical ice structure rising up to 100 feet out of the water. It appears suddenly, without any prior signs of an iceberg, does not drift or break away, but seems to rise from the depths, lingers on the surface for 5 to 15 minutes, and then slowly disappears back into the sea. Local Inuit hunters call it the ice finger and claim that it always appears in strictly defined places, like a grid, and that no human has ever been able to photograph it. Scientists from the Danish Polar Research Institute attempted to document the phenomenon in 2017 using an unmanned drone. It transmitted a real-time video feed showing a thin but clearly defined wall, like an elongated column with perfectly smooth edges. However, when trying to take still frames or save a recording, the files turned out to be empty. All the frames at the moment the structure appeared were absolutely white, as if the image was burned out or not recorded at all. Similar attempts were made again and again from cameras, radars, satellites. Each time, everything worked until the second the finger appeared. Then, either a gray rectangle, or a failure, or a return to the image after 10 to 15 seconds without the anomaly. All video formats were found to be partially corrupted, with metadata replaced, as if the system was unable to record what should not have been recorded. Those who have seen the structure with their own eyes describe it as unnaturally smooth, with a geometry not typical of natural icebergs. Straight edges, no cracks, a slight glow along the vertical edges. It stands absolutely still despite the waves and casts no shadow, even in direct sunlight. In 2020, one oceanographer proposed a theory. The fingers are temporary focuses of the electromagnetic field, caused by a breakthrough from deep cavities where water and ice interact at impossible temperatures. However, the physics of such a structure does not explain why it cannot be detected. One fragment has been preserved in the field notes. A sailor on watch recorded on a dictaphone that everything around became quiet, as if the sound was being absorbed, and the air became thicker, as if you were breathing through wet cotton wool. He noted that at the moment the ice wall appeared, neither wind nor waves were heard, and his eyes began to water for no reason. Some researchers believe that we are dealing with an optical glitch of the gravitational type, a phenomenon in which reality itself bends slightly, creating a visual object that exists, but not in full projection. And therefore, everything that records it collides with empty space, a frame that cannot be. There are other hypotheses, that the fingers are structures not of our planet, emerging according to an unknown algorithm, that they are antennas, fusions between environments, or simply a reminder of something that is larger and older than the Earth itself under the ice. The phenomenon is not officially recognized. It is too fickle. But everyone who has seen it says one thing. At this moment, you are not just watching the ice. You feel that it is looking back at you. A motionless ball of light, suspended forever off the coast of Panama. A few kilometers off the Pacific coast of Panama, near the Perla Islands, Fishermen and marine patrols have reported from time to time since the 1990s a spherical light hanging above the water. The size of a small boat, this ball emits a steady silvery yellow glow, does not pulse, does not move, and, most importantly, does not react to either the wind or the current. It simply hangs 2.5 meters above the water, always in the same place. It was first officially recorded by Coast Guard officers in 2002. The object was not reflected on the radar, but was clearly visible visually. An attempt to approach it resulted in a complete loss of radio communication, the shutdown of navigation instruments, and a severe disturbance of orientation among the crew members. They described the feeling that the space around became soft, as if the air had been compressed. At the same time, the light did not have a thermal effect, did not blind the eyes, and had no shadow. On video recordings, the ball was recorded as a flickering dot, but when trying to zoom in, the frame began to ripple, distorting to the point of complete disintegration. Not a single high-resolution shot could be saved. The pixels in place of the ball were always erased, as if the information had been cut out at the camera matrix level. Later, an attempt was made to fly around the object using a drone. The device transmitted a picture exactly until it entered the 50-meter zone. Then the signal disappeared instantly, and the gyroscope began to rotate chaotically, as if the principles of inertia were violated inside the zone. The drone returned to its original position with all data erased. There was nothing on board except empty system files. But the most amazing thing happened in 2015 when an international oceanographic mission decided to install a stationary buoy with cameras and spectral analyzers near the zone. The equipment worked without interruption for exactly 9 days, transmitting data 24/7. During all this time, the light did not change its position by a centimeter. Not a single millimeter of oscillation, no deviation in shape, no change in spectrum. The light was perfectly stable, as if it were suspended not in space, but outside of time. Spectral analysis showed that the sphere's radiation was out of the visible balance, with a slight bias toward the ultraviolet and microwave ranges. However, no biological reactions or thermal traces were recorded in the water beneath it. The water remained cold. The deep probe, lowered directly under the sphere, suddenly disappeared from radar. A day later, it surfaced at a distance of 60 kilometers with a disabled navigation system and damaged memory. Scientists have been unable to offer a plausible explanation. Some have talked about a stable plasma formation. Others have suggested a possible hologram or laser interference. But how a hologram could hang in the same place for 20 years without failing has not been explained by anyone. Locals are sure that this is the eye of the underwater sky, a fragment of another world that came out but did not leave. There are those who claim that one day a boat with teenagers approached the light, and they did not return, although the shore was in sight. The vessel was found, but without a trace. No blood, no struggle, no losses. Just empty, drifting calmly, as if the people went out, somewhere in the wrong direction. The ball of light is still there. It doesn't require explanation. It just is. And if you happen to be nearby, don't stare too long, because it's looking too. Voices from the depths of the Bay of Biscay. The Bay of Biscay, located between the west coast of France and northern Spain, is known for its sudden storms, deep troughs, and heavy waves. But among the old naval reports, submarine reports, and fishermen's tales, there is something far stranger. Voices from the depths that can never be recorded but are remembered by all who hear them. The first official mention of them appeared in 1973, when the Spanish trawler Santa Alma recorded a collective auditory phenomenon. The crew, in absolute silence in a calm, suddenly heard a voice, not one, but several, as if speaking in an unknown language, coming from right under the surface of the water. All 11 people on board heard the same thing, a dispassionate speech without intonation, like a rustling choir, at once distinct and completely incomprehensible. When they tried to turn on the tape recorder, the device hissed and stopped. So did the radio. And after 2 minutes, the sounds disappeared. But each crew member could reproduce the melody of the speech, its tempo, its repetitions, its sound wave, although no one could say what exactly was said. In the following years, such reports became more frequent. French and British research vessels, naval patrols, even tourist yachts, all encountered the same scenario. For a moment, all surrounding sound seemed to die down. Then, a strange rhythmic noise appeared, reminiscent of breathing or whispering. Then, voices. No device recorded a signal. Even in spectral analysis mode, complete silence. In 1995, a team of oceanographers from Bordeaux carried out a special expedition to study these anomalies. They installed several underwater microphones and infrasound sensors. 3 times during the week, the participants heard voices, but the equipment recorded a flat line of silence. Not a single sound pulse was detected. However, all 8 people on the team gave a similar description of what they heard. A conversation without pauses, like reading, spoken simultaneously from inside and outside the head. Later, one of them, an acoustician by training, noted, "It wasn't in my ears, it was in my head, but it wasn't mine. I don't understand what it meant, but I know that I know it." As if the meaning was already known to me, but not accessible. The most disturbing incident occurred in 2006, when an autonomous platform with a continuous hydrophone recording system disappeared in the Gulf area. 12 hours before the disappearance, the duty officer on shore reported that in the station's transmission, a female voice could be heard in the background, repeating the same phrase in an unknown dialect. A few minutes later, the signal disappeared. The equipment has not been found to this day. Local fishermen call the phenomenon simply the talking sea. Old people warn that if you hear a voice, you need to close your eyes and be silent because it is not speaking to you, and you should not answer. Some believe that these are the echoes of sunken ships, whose crews continue to speak through the thickness of centuries. Others, that these are not the voices of the dead, but the memories of the ocean, flying to the surface when the water becomes too calm. And some people believe that this is not an echo of the past, but the voice of the future, stuck in time, looking for those who will be able to hear it, but not write it down. Endless descent into a cave near the Maldives. On the southwestern outskirts of the Maldives archipelago, in an area where coral reefs descend into the so-called Indian Trench, divers and researchers have been reporting since the late 1990s a strange formation. An underwater cave, the entrance to which is visually no more than a few meters deep, but when diving inside it turns out to be impossible to reach the bottom. Even with professional equipment, relief maps, and depth sensors. The cave received an unofficial name, Stairs Down. From the outside, it is just a depression between rocks, about 10 meters wide, with a smooth entrance and transparent water. But once you go inside, the spatial sensation changes. According to those who have tried to explore the cave, at a depth of 20 meters, the feeling of pressure disappears, as if the diver stops feeling the weight of the water above him. Visually, the walls expand, but when trying to record them on video, the image begins to duplicate, distorts, as if the camera sees several perspectives at once. In 2003, a team of 3 scuba divers, wearing full life support, went inside with the intention of reaching the bottom and mapping it. They didn't return in time. 40 minutes later, they surfaced, unconscious. One died of acute decompression. The other 2, after weeks of rehabilitation, reported that they did not feel the passage of time and just floated downwards until the light began to return to them from behind. At the same time, their instruments showed a depth of an astonishing 22 meters. But they were underwater for more than 40 minutes, with a complete loss of orientation. Later, in 2009, an autonomous underwater drone equipped with a laser rangefinder was lowered into the cave. After 7 minutes, the depth of measurements exceeded 300 meters, although according to topographic data, the bottom in this place should be 40 meters below the surface. But the strangest thing is that, returning along the trajectory upward, the drone transmitted footage in which the entrance to the cave was in a different place, as if its landmarks had shifted and it had left an area that did not coincide with the entrance. After that, the entrance to the cave was filled in, allegedly for safety reasons. But in 2017, a group of tourists with a guide again discovered the hole, almost in the same place. Having dived to a depth of 10 meters, they saw a black oval in which there was no reflection. The flashlight pointed inside did not illuminate the walls. The light seemed to go into the void. One of them threw a lead weight in there, and it did not hit the bottom, but simply disappeared from sight. There were no air bubbles either. Some local legends tell of Kaulamadhu, the throat of the ocean, where everything that should not be in this world goes. The sages in these stories warn, if you enter, you can only come out before dawn. After that, never again. Modern physicists, having studied the data, are inclined to the hypothesis. In this area of the ocean, there may be a topographic distortion, not necessarily physical, but spatial, a kind of loop where space wraps in on itself. It's hard to believe, but all the facts, from depth violations to duplication of the visual sequence, speak to one thing. This is not just a cave. It is a structure that does not obey the map, and perhaps does not exist in the ordinary geography of the world. And if it really does lead down, then where? To another dimension? Inside the planet? Or perhaps to a space where there is no such thing as down? A fish that cannot be photographed. In one of the deep-sea areas of the southern Indian Ocean, between Madagascar and the Crozet Archipelago, research missions, fishermen, and even random tourists from yachts increasingly report encounters with a creature that evokes the feeling of being observed, even if a person does not see it directly. It is called the invisible fish, but this name is conditional because no one has yet been able to photograph it, despite clear memories and absolutely identical descriptions. All witnesses describe it in the same words, regardless of language, country, or even age. They talk about a smooth, long form shimmering within itself, about eyes that do not look but press, and that the body of the fish seems empty but glows from within. It appears at depth. It has not been seen closer to the surface. At the same time, the devices do not record any movement, the presence of biomass, or changes in temperature. In 2010, a French underwater expedition attempted to record the creature using 6 cameras with different spectral ranges. At the moment when the operator reported direct visual contact, all cameras began recording distortions, and the final image on all media turned out to be a blurry spot with artifacts similar to digital noise. At the same time, the cameraman himself drew the creature by hand an hour after surfacing, exactly as the Malayan fisherman described it a year earlier, not knowing about its existence. Even the proportions, color, shape, and location of the fins matched. Later, this drawing was shown to the natives of the Andaman Islands. One of the elders recognized it immediately, saying that it was Lakahi, a spirit that is not a fish, not an animal, not a man, but knows everyone who sees it. It cannot be caught, cannot be photographed, cannot be shown, but it cannot be forgotten. In 2018, neuropsychologists attempted to study this phenomenon as a collective hallucination or archetypal visualization. They conducted tests with volunteers who were independently asked to draw a fish that evokes fear and a feeling of being watched. More than 60% of participants from different countries and cultures drew the same shape with an empty body and a single black spot eye in the center, and even the angle of the head and the curve of the fins were the same. After analyzing these images, it was discovered that the structure matches the shape of a deep-sea vortex recorded by satellites in the same area. That is, people are not describing a living creature, but something that manifests itself as an image associated with the behavioral form of water at great depths. But then the question arises, why does everyone describe it as a fish with an eye? One oceanographer has suggested that this could be a form of information contact, a being or phenomenon that does not have a body in the conventional sense, but is able to embed itself into a person's visual consciousness using the common lexical structure of the brain. It's as if it paints itself in your head, and everyone who sees it gets the same picture, regardless of language and culture. That's why it can't be photographed. Because it's never been outside. It's always inside, and it only comes when you're ready to see what's not there. Anomalous band of hot water. Among the boundless expanses of the Pacific Ocean, starting off the coast of Peru and disappearing over the horizon in the region of Indonesia, there is an anomalous strip of water about 200 meters wide, more than 9,000 kilometers long, the temperature of which consistently exceeds the surrounding temperature by 6 to 7 degrees, regardless of depth, time of day, weather conditions, and season. It is as if cut with a ruler in the body of the ocean, straight without bends, like a cut, but not in matter, but in its behavior. The structure was first noticed in 2002 when several satellite temperature sensors began to show a strange thermal signature. Not a spot as with underwater volcanic activity, and not a winding strip as with currents, but a completely flat line running from the west coast of South America to the shores of Papua New Guinea. It was so absurd in its geometry that it was initially thought to be an error in the image processing algorithm. However, after a few years, new satellites confirmed that the strip exists. Moreover, it does not move or dissipate, despite constant oceanic fluctuations. Deviations in salinity, pressure, and even water density are recorded inside it, as if the liquid in this line belongs to a different physical regime. At the same time, everything around remains an ordinary ocean. In 2011, an oceanographic expedition attempted to sail through this line on a research vessel. At first, everything seemed normal. A slight warming of the water, a smooth surface, no waves. But after 3 minutes, the instruments began to fail one after another. The gyroscope stopped stabilizing, the GPS began to jump, transmitting coordinates with a spread of hundreds of kilometers, and echolocation showed that the depth under the vessel was greater than the maximum range of the probe. When the team left the area, the system started working again, as if nothing had happened. The strangest thing is that the water taken from this line did not lose temperature in the laboratory for several hours. It cooled, but unevenly. In the center of the test tube, a point of heat was preserved, as if it did not radiate heat, but retained it in itself, contrary to thermodynamics. Later, spectral analysis revealed that water in the anomalous band absorbs light differently. Some waves, especially the near-infrared range, disappear inside it completely, without being reflected. This allowed us to put forward a hypothesis. Perhaps in the zone there is a frontier between two layers of the ocean, but not a physical division, but an energetic one, as if the line were a boundary zone between two measurement systems. And then the question arises, if this line is a boundary, then between what and what? Some scientists in private circles cautiously talk about the possibility of a topological fracture, a rare situation when a four-dimensional gap forms in three-dimensional space, not noticeable visually, but felt through the physics of the environment. Local myths, from Polynesia to the coastal tribes of South America, agree on one thing. There is an invisible road in the ocean, along which no ships go, but time itself moves. And this road was not created. It was imprinted like a trace of something huge and ancient that once crossed our world, leaving nothing, except a warm, straight line running through everything. Dead Lagoon in the Caribbean. In the eastern Caribbean, in one of the hard-to-reach corners between the islands of Dominica and Martinique, in a strait known for its strong currents and hidden holes, a small lagoon has been discovered that looks no different from hundreds of others. Transparent, calm, with perfectly blue water. But there is one difference. There is not a single form of life in it. It's not just that there are no fish, or algae, or crustaceans. In the lagoon, about 60 meters wide and up to 8 meters deep, not a single bacterium has been found. Not in the water, not in the bottom silt, not on floating objects. Any organic matter that gets inside, be it algae, insects, or even microorganisms from the surface, disintegrates or disappears, leaving no trace. Local fishermen call this place water without shadow and avoid it. They say that everything that gets there does not return, not even sound. The splash of water here does not echo, and the boat's motor sounds like it is in cotton wool. The lagoon was accidentally discovered in 2006 by scientists studying the boundaries of thermal zones. When collecting water, it turned out that the test tubes collected in the center of the lagoon were sterile, without traces of DNA, bacteria, or viruses. Research showed that the oxygen level was normal. The temperature was stable. The pH was neutral. But any living culture placed in this water died within minutes, even resistant strains that could survive in acid, radiation, or complete darkness. Later, scientists tried to introduce artificial microflora into the lagoon. Nothing took root. Moreover, microscopic organisms that had previously been in the water and mud disappeared when they crossed the lagoon's border, as if they had encountered an invisible barrier. One of the researchers described the sensation this way. You don't notice the boundary, but as soon as you cross it, the space changes. The air becomes dry, the water becomes quiet, and it seems as if you are inside a sealed capsule. In 2013, a drone was sent down to the lagoon to study the bottom. The camera captured images of perfectly clean sand, without a single shell, stone, or even traces of current. There were no shadows or glare in the footage. It was as if the light was absorbed evenly, without reflection. But the strangest thing is that all the sounds in the recording disappeared. The microphone worked, but instead of the splashing of water and the noise of propellers, there was complete silence, not even electronic noise. As if the lagoon itself, a place where sound dies. Some have suggested that it is the result of a geochemical anomaly, perhaps the remnant of an ancient volcanic eruption saturated with heavy metals or radioactive elements. However, spectral analysis has found nothing of the sort. One hypothesis is much more frightening. The lagoon is a closed system, isolated from life, not physically, but energetically, as if a wave emission had passed through it, burned on a microscale, but leaving a trace of absolute sterility. Local myths say that the lagoon was the eye of the sea, which once looked up and saw something terrible, and closed forever. Since then, the water in it does not reflect the sky, but preserves the memory of what should not be. A disappearing reef off the coast of Australia. In northeastern Australia, between Cape Tribulation and the outer edge of the Great Barrier Reef, in an area where maps show deep, unobstructed water, a strange formation has been appearing and disappearing for decades, unmarked by navigation systems but reported by captains, fishing boats, and the occasional night explorer. This is not a mirage or an illusion. This is a reef, long, winding, as if carved out of the blackness of the water. It appears only at night, when the surface of the water becomes smooth, and only when moving along a certain trajectory, from southwest to northeast, strictly at an angle of 34 degrees to magnetic north. Whoever tried to approach from another direction saw nothing. The water remains black, deep, empty. But if you enter the right vector, suddenly a slowly glowing underwater contour appears ahead, as if the bottom relief itself begins to appear, with iridescent green and blue, like phosphorescence, but too clear, too architectural. Researchers who have entered the reef zone say that it looks like an underwater street, with sharp turns, symmetrical depressions, and even something like steps or curbs, as if someone created a structure with a certain geometry. But it turned out to be buried and hidden in the film of time. You can swim above it. The depth remains safe, but if you try to dive, and everything disappears. Cameras, flashlights, even hands, show only darkness. The flora and fauna in this area behave strangely. Fish avoid the reef, even at night. Not a single coral, not a single jellyfish. Only emptiness against a background of clearly defined forms. It feels like you are moving over something unnatural, and the entire ecosystem knows it. One day, a sea turtle, accidentally entering the reef zone, suddenly changed direction and swam away, despite the fact that earlier it was calmly moving towards the surface. In 2016, one of the research boats with an experimental sonar system tried to highlight the structure. A grid appeared on the screen, clear, symmetrical, with many parallel lines piercing the terrain, as if the reef was not random, but designed. But as soon as the coordinates of the zone were transmitted to another vessel, nothing. No signal, no line, no reflection. Just ordinary open sea. Captains who know about this place do not enter it twice. They say that if the reef saw you, the second time it will be different. One sailor who visited the zone twice with an interval of 3 years began to have problems with orientation in time. He claimed that between 2 points of the route, a few minutes passed, although according to the instruments, it took 6 hours. At this time, his vessel was moving in a straight line, but the GPS indicated loops and turns, as if the ship was moving through an invisible labyrinth. Some oceanographers suggest that the reef is the remnant of an ancient structure, perhaps a sunken city or artificial construction, hidden under layers of illusion and depth. But there is another theory, that it is not a reef, but a holographic shadow cast by an object existing on another plane, and visible only at a certain angle of intersection with our world. The local Aborigines call this place the Place of Nightstones, and claim that if you see them, they see you. And while you pass over the reef, something below you, motionless, looks up. Spiral whirlpool in the Black Sea. Off the western coast of Crimea, about 60 kilometers from the shore, in a water area where sea currents are usually calm, every year for the last 30 years, a completely symmetrical spiral whirlpool has appeared, which for some unknown reason always appears in exactly the same place and always remains the same size. Exactly 137 meters in diameter. It doesn't suck up boats. It doesn't create dangerous waves. But it doesn't disappear until exactly 72 hours after it appears. It begins on a precise date, usually mid-September, and ends as suddenly as it appears, leaving no trace on satellite images, no change in water temperature, no biological effects. What's most frightening is that it's impossible to photograph the whirlpool from above. From drones and satellites, there's only a circular ripple zone without a spiral. From a boat, it's clearly visible, a perfectly regular geometric shape, moving clockwise with the same interval between turns. If you try to measure its parameters, they always match, down to the centimeter, regardless of the wave, wind, weather, and year of observation. Dives inside have been conducted repeatedly. In 2009, a group of divers with an automatic rope descended into the central part of the whirlpool. At a depth of 16 meters, the pressure began to behave unstable. The instruments showed a simultaneous increase and decrease in neighboring points. 3 of the 4 participants experienced a sense of déjà vu, describing the same phrases, images, and sounds that never actually happened. It was as if a cognitive effect was occurring within the whirlpool, the same for everyone. Inside the spiral, the water temperature becomes slightly higher, by 0.4 degrees. This seems insignificant if not for one but. This difference is stable, it does not fluctuate. This is not turbulence or a seasonal effect. This is the internal state of the zone, as if a mechanism is working in it, maintaining the parameters at an unchanged level. A scientific explanation eludes. It was assumed that this is a special form of hydrodynamic pit caused by underwater geological structures. But there is nothing at the bottom, only a smooth sedimentary layer. The hypothesis of underwater gas emissions has been refuted. The methane concentration is within normal limits. Salinity is stable. There are no signs of fumaroles, mud volcanoes, or underwater springs. The strangest thing happened in 2022, when during another observation, a new radio beacon was installed in the center of the whirlpool. After 72 hours and the disappearance of the spiral, the beacon was not found. The device, secured with a cable at a depth of 5 meters, simply disappeared, although the cable remained intact. There was no cut or break on its surface, as if it had been pulled through a wall of water without touching the cable itself. Local fishermen try to avoid this area. They say that the water listens there. According to them, if you stand nearby for a long time and remain silent, you can hear the echo of voices, indistinct but familiar, as if the sea itself is remembering something from your past. On these days, birds flew around the area in an arc, and the ship's cats on board began to hiss toward the center, even if they were inside the cabins. There is a theory that this is a memory of water triggered by an ancient catastrophe, or a fragment of a time loop imprinted in this place. But no theory explains why the size of the whirlpool does not change, why its geometry is absolutely perfect, why it returns every year, and why it never repeats itself the same way twice, in sensations. A pool of liquid mirrors in the depths of the Atlantic. Deep in the North Atlantic, in the area between the Azores and the Canary Islands, at a depth of about 4 kilometers, lies one of the most mysterious underwater anomalies, which researchers call the liquid mirror. This depression in the ocean floor, about 40 meters in diameter and no more than 5 in depth, is filled with a substance that by all indications should be ordinary water, but does not reflect anything, including light, sound waves, or even its own contents. The pool was first discovered in 1994 by a French expedition's autonomous vehicle studying deep-sea sulfur springs. A camera that accidentally caught the edge of the formation showed a surface that shone like polished glass, but remained absolutely motionless despite the movement of water around it. An attempt to illuminate it with spotlights revealed something strange. The light was not reflected back, but seemed to be absorbed and extinguished in the thickness of several centimeters from the surface, without illuminating either the bottom or its own source. But the most disturbing thing began when the camera came close. The recording shows how the lens is aimed at the center of the mirror, and in it there is no reflection of not only the device, but also the light, cable, bottom structure. As if it is not a liquid, but a hole in the image, not black, not cloudy, just nothing. Even the software recognition of shapes in the frame gave null surface. The surface is not recognized. The scientists sent a second device there, this time with a manipulator. It lowered a probe into the pool. The instrument showed normal temperature, slightly higher water density, and no toxins or acids. But when the manipulator pulled out the probe, its surface was absolutely dry, as if the liquid did not stick to anything. Moreover, one of the cameras recorded an anomaly. During the contact of the probe with the liquid, its shadow disappeared, and the probe itself seemed to disappear in the frame for several seconds. Subsequent attempts were made to lower a probe with biological samples into the pool. All living organisms, from bacteria to tiny crustaceans, died within 5 seconds. But not from poison or temperature. Their cellular structure had disintegrated, and their DNA was unreadable, as if information about them had been removed from the environment. At the same time, the bodies themselves looked like empty shells. One of the most discussed hypotheses was the assumption that the pool is a point of informational rupture, where the environment itself does not support the principle of mirroring, that is, does not contain a reflection of reality. As if it were a window into something that has no form, has no time, and does not retain information. In 2019, a private research group sent a third expedition to the zone. The device entered the pool completely and failed. It could not be found either by GPS or hydroacoustics. 3 days later, 300 kilometers from the entry point, its body surfaced. Without the filling, only the shell. Cameras, discs, microcircuits. Everything was gone, as if it had been carefully removed from the inside and without a trace. Some scientists have refused to continue the study, citing the risk of information absorption. They are sure that if a person or consciousness looks into this liquid mirror too deeply, they may not return, not physically, but in perception. Because what does not reflect does not release memories. Local legends preserved by Madeiran fishermen say, "There is a window at the bottom that looks into you. But you don't look back. You won't see anything there, and you won't see yourself either." An underwater series of doors on the bottom of the Indian Ocean. In a remote part of the Indian Ocean, between the west coast of Australia and the southern edges of the Seychelles Plateau, at a depth of about 3.5 kilometers, a probe from one of the Japanese research vessels accidentally discovered a chain of rectangular structures embedded in the seabed. Their shapes and sizes were so precise and symmetrical that they were initially mistaken for a visualization error or image overlap. But repeated scans revealed that they were real vertical doors, each about 3 meters high and slightly more than 1 meter wide. The walls around were stone, natural, but inside each niche there was a perfectly smooth surface, as if cut or inserted. All the doors had something like hinges on one side, thin curved protrusions built into the rock, and small depressions on the other. Everything points to the fact that these are mechanical structures. But the most astonishing thing is that all the doors are hermetically sealed, and attempts to mechanically influence them, even using underwater manipulators, did not give any result. A 2014 expedition involving an international team from Germany, Japan, and India attempted to capture a close-up of one of the doors. The camera captured a clear outline, but the surface around the door began to slowly pulsate, not physically, but optically, as if the image were shaking, as if trying to focus on something that shouldn't be there. At this time, echolocation showed an instantaneous drop in signal, as if the structure itself was absorbing the sound. The strangest episode was when the robot with the laser scanner approached the lowest of the doors. As soon as the beam touched the surface, the manipulator stopped. The camera didn't turn off, but it showed the following. A glint appeared on the inside of the door, as if someone was moving behind it. 3 seconds later, the beam broke off. It didn't break, didn't disappear, but split, transmitting a decaying spectrum to the screen as if its reflection had passed through a liquid prism. Immediately after that, the tracking system overloaded and the data from the drone was erased. Later, the team decided to use an underwater microphone aimed directly at the structure. For an hour, there was no sound. Then, one clear click. No echo, no distortion. Just the sound of a latch closing from the inside. Geologists claim that such symmetrical forms cannot exist in this zone. The bottom tectonics are too chaotic. There are no traces of volcanic activity to explain the formation of the doors as a result of lava crystallization. Inside the doors, according to probing data, there is a void extending deep into the rock massif. What kind of structure is hidden behind them? No one knows. But all attempts to open at least one of them ended the same way. In failure. Not because the materials are too strong, but because all the doors are locked from the inside. As if someone on the other side knows that they are trying to open them, and does not allow it. Local tribes from the shores of Sumatra tell an ancient legend about the passages of the spirit into the depths of the world, where a stone turns into a mirror, and doors do not let you out, not because you are not worthy, but because no one inside should remember that he was outside. This is the last point on the map of our oceans, where all the answers are behind a closed edge, and perhaps someone is already looking back, but from the darkness that was not allowed back into the light. Remembering everything that was discussed in this video, we can say with confidence that the ocean holds not just secrets. It guards what has not been given a name. Every signal, every structure, every whisper in the depths is like a part of someone else's memory that accidentally leaked into our world. We measure, we document, we hypothesize, but at the bottom there is something more than science. There are the boundaries of reality, the boundaries of perception, the boundaries of man himself. And perhaps it is precisely because we cannot explain these phenomena that they continue to exist. In still water, in dead light, in silence that seems alive. The ocean doesn't wait for us, it just remembers. Everything, always, without exception.